Hey there. Welcome to another episode of MTG Relax Lists, where you and I take a power level 7 stroll through a deck list you may have never seen before. Today, we're looking at an Izzet or blue-red Voltron deck, helmed by Iron Man, Titan of Innovation. Iron Man is a 4/4 creature with flying and haste that costs 3 colorless and 1 blue, 1 red, or Izzet. Iron Man's ability is called Genius Industrialist and reads, whenever Iron Man attacks, create a treasure token. Then you may sacrifice a non-creature artifact. If you do, search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. In this deck, there are 26 basic lands, some of them which I'm showing you in the background right now. But not all of the lands are basic. 13 of the 39 lands are non-basic, and I'll show them to you now. The first one is called Inventor's Fair. Inventor's Fair is a legendary land that reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. You can tap it to add 1 colorless mana, or you can pay 4 colorless and tap it, and sacrifice Inventor's Fair to search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Activate only if you control 3 or more artifacts. Next is Rogue's Passage. Rogue's Passage has 2 abilities. The first is tap to add 1 colorless mana. In the second, you can pay 4 colorless mana and tap it. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. The flavor reads, rumors quickly spread among thieves about a labyrinth without walls and a prize beyond all measures of worth. Next is Thriving Isle. Thriving Isle enters tapped. As it enters, choose a color other than blue. You can tap to add blue or 1 mana of the chosen color. The flavor reads, all the wonders of the natural world in one breathtaking microcosm. Next is Thriving Bluff. Thriving Bluff enters tapped. As it enters, choose a color other than red. You can tap to add 1 red or 1 mana of the chosen color. The flavor reads, as eons passed, the rock wore away, revealing the rich colors at the mountain's heart. Next is Temple of Epiphany. Temple of Epiphany enters tapped. When Temple of Epiphany enters, scry 1. You may tap it to add 1 blue or 1 red. Next is Ferris Lake. You may pay 1 colorless and tap it to add Izzet or 1 blue and 1 red. The flavor reads, stability and volatility churn together, creating beauty and danger both. Next is Swiftwater Cliffs. This land enters tapped. When this land enters, you gain 1 life. You may tap it to add 1 blue or 1 red. Next is Restless Spire. Restless Spire enters the battlefield tapped. You may tap it to add 1 blue or 1 red. If you pay 1 blue and 1 red, Until end of turn, Restless Spire becomes a 2/1 blue and red elemental creature with, as long as it's your turn, this creature has first strike. It's still a land. Whenever Restless Spire attacks, scry 1. Next is Cascade Bluffs. Cascade Bluffs has 2 abilities. The first is tap to add 1 colorless mana. The second is to pay either 1 blue or 1 red and tap it to add 2 blue, 1 blue and 1 red, or 2 red. The flavor reads, Travelers bathe in the falls to wash away curses from the pukas who lurk nearby. Next is Shivan Reef. Shivan Reef has 2 abilities. The first is tap to add 1 colorless mana. The second is tap to add 1 blue or 1 red. Shivan Reef deals 1 damage to you. Next is Sulphur Falls. Sulphur Falls enters tapped unless you control an island or a mountain. You can tap it to add 1 blue or 1 red. The flavor reads, We have inherited the mysteries of the Thran, but few of the answers. Joyra. Next is Reliquary Tower. Reliquary Tower reads, You have no maximum hand size, and you can tap it to add 1 colorless. The flavor reads, Once guarded by the Knights of the Reliquary, the tower stands now protected only by its own remoteness, its dusty treasures open to plunder by anyone. Next, and lastly, but not leastly, is Volatile Vault. Volatile Vault has 2 abilities. The first is tap to add 1 colorless. The second is pay 1 colorless and tap it, and sacrifice Volatile Vault to destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. That player may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. You create a treasure token. Next are the instants, of which there are 6. The first one is Quick Study. Quick Study costs 2 colorless and 1 blue, and reads, Draw 2 cards. The flavor reads, At first, Johann was annoyed that the library had decided to reorganize itself, but he had to admit that storing the cookbooks in the cauldron made a certain kind of sense. The next is Shock. Shock cost 1 red and reads, Shock deals 2 damage to any target. The flavor reads, The beauty of it is they never see it coming. Ever. Razix, Spark Mage. Next up is Galvanic Blast. Galvanic Blast costs 1 red and reads, Galvanic Blast deals 2 damage to any target. Metalcraft. Galvanic Blast deals 4 damage instead if you control 3 or more artifacts. The flavor reads, All units, set repulsors to maximum power. Next is Timur Battle Rage. Timur Battle Rage costs 1 colorless and 1 red, and reads, Target creature gains double strike until end of turn. Ferocious. That creature also gains trample until end of turn if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. Next is Abrade. Abrade costs 1 colorless and 1 red, and reads, choose one. Abrade deals 3 damage to target creature, or destroy target artifact. The flavor reads, the desert is a voracious beast, devouring both flesh and stone. Next is Think Twice. Think Twice costs 1 colorless and 1 blue, and reads, draw a card. Flashback, 2 colorless and 1 blue. The flavor reads, I'm of 2 minds about this. Next are the sorceries, of which there are only 4. The first is Awaken the Sleeper. Awaken the Sleeper costs 3 colorless and 1 red, and reads, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn. If it's equipped, you may destroy all equipment attached to that creature. The flavor reads, without faith in each other, we truly would have nothing left. Isn't that right, Malik? Malik? Darvin, Mirren Rebel. Last words. Next is Hazardous Blast. Hazardous Blast costs 3 colorless and 1 red, and reads, Hazardous Blast deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. Creatures your opponents control can't block this turn. The flavor reads, the Machine Orthodoxy finds strength in numbers. The Quiet Furnace finds that amusing. Next is Blasphemous Act. Blasphemous Act costs 8 colorless and 1 red, and reads, this spell costs 1 colorless less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. Blasphemous Act deals 13 damage to each creature. The flavor reads, holy places are no longer sanctuary from death, and death is no longer sanctuary from anything. Talia, Knight Cathar. The last of the sorceries is Vandal Blast. Vandal Blast costs 1 red and reads, destroy target artifact you don't control. Overload, 4 colorless and 1 red. The flavor reads, I hope the review board was paying attention because my thesis would be hard to do twice. Spiricus, Prismari Mage Student. Next up are the enchantments, of which there are 8. The first being a room called Mirror Room and Fractured Realm. Mirror Room costs 2 colorless and 1 blue, and reads, when you unlock this door, create a token copy that's a copy of target creature you control, except it's a reflection in addition to its other creature types. Fractured Realm costs 5 colorless and 2 blue, and reads, if a triggered ability of a permanent you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. Next is Mirrodin Besieged. Mirrodin Besieged costs 2 colorless and 1 blue, and reads, as Mirrodin Besiege enters the battlefield, choose Mirren or Phyrexian. Mirren. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature token. Phyrexian. At the beginning of your end step, draw a card, then discard a card. Then, if there are 15 or more artifact cards in your graveyard, target opponent loses the game. Next is another room, Roaring Furnace and Steaming Sauna. Roaring Furnace costs 1 colorless and 1 red, and reads, when you unlock this door, this room deals damage equal to the number of cards in your hand to target creature an opponent controls. Steaming Sauna costs 3 colorless and 2 blue, and reads, you have no maximum hand size. At the beginning of your end step, draw a card. Next is Imprisoned in the Moon. Imprisoned in the Moon costs 2 colorless and 1 blue, and reads, enchant creature, land, or planeswalker. Enchanted Permanent is a colorless land with tap, add 1 colorless, and loses all other card types and abilities. The flavor reads, only 1 vault was great enough to hold Emrakul. Next is another room, Charred Foyer and Warped Space. Charred Foyer costs 3 colorless and 1 red, and reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. You may play it this turn. Warped Space costs 4 colorless and 2 red, and reads, once each turn, you may pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for a spell you cast from exile. Next is City on Fire. City on Fire costs 5 colorless and 3 red, and reads, convoke. Your creatures can help cast this spell. Each creature you tap while casting this spell pays for 1 colorless or 1 mana of that creature's color. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage instead. Next is Blacksmith's Talent. Blacksmith's Talent costs 1 red to go to level 1, and reads, when Blacksmith's Talent enters, create a colorless equipment artifact token named Sword, with equipped creature gets +1/+1, and equip 2. Level 2 costs 2 colorless and 1 red, and reads, at the beginning of combat on your turn, attach target equipment you control to up to 1 target creature you control. Level 3 costs 3 colorless and 1 red, and reads, during your turn, equipped creatures you control have double strike and haste. The last of the enchantments is Bident of Thassa. Bident of Thassa costs 2 colorless and 2 blue, and reads, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. For 1 colorless and 1 blue, and tap, creatures your opponents control attack this turn if able. The flavor reads, only Kiora would dare steal the weapon of a god. Only Kiora could have succeeded. Next up are the creatures, 9 of which, including Iron Man, are artifact creatures, 13 of which are not. The first of which is Academy Manufactor. Academy Manufactor is a 1/3 assembly worker and costs 3 colorless and reads, if you would create a clue, food, or treasure token, instead create 1 of each. The flavor reads, automated systems at the Talarian Academy sort new acquisitions for optimal use, determining which should be studied, eaten, or sold. Next is Enthusiastic Mechanaut. Enthusiastic Mechanaut is a 2/2 Goblin Artificer and costs Izzet, or 1 blue and 1 red, and reads, flying. Artifact spells you cast cost 1 colorless less to cast. The flavor reads, greetings, fellow inventors, the Aki shouted, attempting a friendly smile. To her dismay, the greeting was met only with shrieks and alarms being activated. Next is Foundry Inspector. Foundry Inspector is a 3/2 construct and costs 3 colorless and reads, artifact spells you cast cost 1 colorless less to cast. The flavor reads, automaton inspectors ensure that the consulate's stringent standards for mass production are upheld. Next is Transplant Theorist. Transplant Theorist is a 2/4 Phyrexian Artificer that costs 3 colorless and 1 blue, and reads, whenever Transplant Theorist or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. If you pay 2, put target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. Next is Junk Diver. Junk Diver is a 1/1 bird that costs 3 colorless and reads, flying. When Junk Diver dies, return another target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. The flavor reads, garbage in, treasure out. Next is Canoptek Spider. Canoptek Spider is a 4/4 spider that costs 5 colorless and reads, flying. Fabricator Claw Array. Whenever another non-token artifact creature or vehicle enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Next is Ornithopter of Paradise. Ornithopter of Paradise is a 0/2 Thopter that costs 2 colorless and reads, flying. Tap to add 1 mana of any color. The flavor reads, through even our darkest days, we must never cease creating. Each new invention brings value to the world, be it beauty, utility, or both. Rashmi, Etherseer. Next, and the last of the artifact creatures, is Scrawling Crawler. Scrawling Crawler is a 3/2 Phyrexian construct that costs 3 colorless and reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player loses 1 life. The flavor reads, it spreads the machine gospel of New Phyrexia, its task incomplete, until all surrender to perfection. Next is Quicksmith Rebel. Quicksmith Rebel is a 3/2 human artificer that costs 3 colorless and 1 red, and reads, when Quicksmith Rebel enters the battlefield, target artifact you control gains, tap. This artifact deals 2 damage to target creature or player, for as long as you control Quicksmith Rebel. The flavor reads, let's just add a bit more stopping power. Next is Coruscation Mage. Coruscation Mage is a 2/2 Otter Wizard that costs 1 colorless and 1 red, and reads, Offspring 2. You may pay an additional 2 colorless as you cast this spell. If you do, when this creature enters, create a 1/1 token copy of it. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. Next is Firebrand Archer. Firebrand Archer is a 2/1 human archer that costs 1 colorless and 1 red, and reads, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. The flavor reads, a word of vengeance, and her arrows awaken in flame. Next is Xiao Jun. Xiao Jun is a 3/3 human assassin that costs 1 colorless and is it, and reads, Leap Strike. As long as it's your turn, Xiao Jun has flying and first strike. Rope Dart. Tap 2 untapped artifacts you control. Xiao Jun deals 1 damage to each opponent. The flavor reads, I shall walk in the darkness and strike swiftly. No one will stop me in my hunt. Next is Serum Sovereign. Serum Sovereign is a 4/4 Phyrexian Sphinx that costs 4 colorless and 1 blue, and reads, Flying. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on Serum Sovereign. Pay 1 blue and remove an oil counter from Serum Sovereign to draw a card, then scry 2. The flavor reads, 1,000 riddles, each with a single answer. The glory of Phyrexia. Next is Harsh Mentor. Harsh Mentor is a 2/2 human cleric that costs 1 colorless and 1 red, and reads, whenever an opponent activates an ability of an artifact, creature, or land on the battlefield, if it isn't a mana ability, Harsh Mentor deals 2 damage to that player. The flavor reads, Fight through it. Next is Padim, Consul of Innovation. Padim is a 1/4 Vidalcan Artificer that costs 3 colorless and 1 blue, and reads, artifacts you control have hexproof. they can't be the targets of spells or abilities your opponents control. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control the artifact with the highest mana value or tied for the highest mana value, draw a card. Up next is Captain Storm, Cosmium Raider. Captain Storm is a 2/2 human pirate that costs Izzet and reads, whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target pirate you control. Next is Joyra, Weatherlight Captain. Joyra is a 3/3 human artificer that costs 2 colorless and Izzet, and reads, whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. Artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic. The flavor reads, as she took the wheel of the Weatherlight for the first time in a millennium, Jorah knew she'd been right to restore the ship. Anything was possible now. Next is Sunshot Militia. Sunshot Militia is a 1/3 human soldier that costs 1 colorless and 1 red, and reads, tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control. Sunshot Militia deals 1 damage to each opponent. Activate only as a sorcery. The flavor reads, as the Legion of Dusk closed in, Oltec citizens rallied to support the Thousand Moons and drive off the invaders. Next is Champion of the Flame. Champion of the Flame is a 1/1 human warrior that costs 1 colorless and 1 red, and reads, trample. Champion of the Flame gets +2/+2 for each aura and equipment attached to it. The flavor reads, Grand Warlord Rada's challengers are always defeated, but she rewards the most passionate with the Flame of Keld. After that, they burn for her. Next is Staunch Crewmate. Staunch Crewmate is a 2/1 human pirate that costs 1 colorless and 1 blue, and reads, when Staunch Crewmate enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact or pirate card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. The flavor reads, leave you? Not a chance. You still owe me money. The last of the creatures is Tempest Angler. Tempest Angler is a 2/2 otter wizard that costs 1 colorless and 2 hybrid Izzet mana, and reads, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Tempest Angler. The flavor reads, casting lines or casting spells. Ain't no one better than me. Last but certainly not least are the artifacts. The first of which being 1,000-Year Elixir. 1,000-Year Elixir costs 3 colorless and reads, you may activate abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste. Pay 1 colorless and tap. Untap target creature. The flavor reads, paradoxically, to tilt the massive jug for a sip, you need the energy of a giant's tonic. Next is Brainstone. Brainstone costs 1 colorless and reads, pay 2 colorless and tap, and sacrifice Brainstone. Draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. The flavor reads, one day it might provide a flash of insight that turns the tide of battle. Meanwhile, it looks lovely on an end table. Next is Mithril Coat. Mithril Coat costs 3 colorless and reads, flash, indestructible. When Mithril Coat enters the battlefield, attach it to target legendary creature you control. Equipped creature has indestructible. Equip 3. Next is Caged Sun. Caged Sun costs 6 colorless and reads, as Caged Sun enters the battlefield, choose a color. Creatures you control of the chosen color get +1/+1. Whenever a land's ability causes you to add 1 or more mana of the chosen color, add 1 additional mana of that color. Next is Sculpting Steel. Sculpting Steel costs 3 colorless and reads, you may have this artifact enter as a copy of any artifact on the battlefield. The flavor reads, I am Groot, Groot stated. Yes, Tony replied. But have you considered being Iron Man? Next up is Voyager Staff. Voyager Staff costs 1 colorless and reads, pay 2 colorless, sacrifice Voyager Staff. Exile target creature. Return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. The flavor reads, Voyager Staves are sought by those hoping to find an escape from the sprawling glut of Ravnica. Next is Commander's Plate. Commander's Plate costs 1 colorless and reads, equipped creature gets +3/+3 and has protection from each color that's not in your commander's color identity. Equip Commander 3. Equip 5. The flavor reads, armor changes, but Iron Man endures. Next is Leyline Axe. Leyline Axe costs 4 colorless and reads, if this card is in your opening hand, you may begin the game with it on the battlefield. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has double strike and trample. Equip 3. The flavor reads, sharp enough to carve a swath through history. Next is Excalibur, Sword of Eden. Excalibur costs 12 colorless and reads, this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total mana value of historic permanents you control. Artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic. Equipped creature gets +10/+0 and vigilance. Equip legendary creature 2. Next is Tamio's Logbook. Tamio's Logbook costs 2 colorless and 1 blue, and reads 5 colorless and 1 blue, and tap. Draw a card. This ability costs 1 colorless less to activate for each other artifact you control. The flavor reads, we are opening a new chapter in the one true story of Phyrexia. Someone must record it for posterity. Tamio. Next is Gold Vein Pick. Gold Vein Pick costs 2 colorless and reads, equipped creature gets +1/+1. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. Equip 1. Next is Saw. Saw costs 2 colorless and reads, equipped creature gets +2/+0. Whenever equipped creature attacks, you may sacrifice a permanent other than that creature or Saw. If you do, draw a card. Equip 2. Next is Soul Ring. Soul Ring costs 1 colorless and reads, tap to add 2 colorless. The flavor reads, I built this arc reactor to save my life, but I intend to use it to save the world. Tony Stark, Iron Man. Next is It Signet. Is It Signet costs 2 colorless and reads, 1 colorless and tap. Add Is It. The Is It Signet is redesigned often, each time becoming closer to a vanity portrait of Niv Mizzet. Next is Forebearer's Blade. Forebearer's Blade costs 3 colorless and reads, equipped creature gets +3/+0 and has vigilance and trample. Whenever equipped creature dies, attach Forebearer's Blade to target creature you control. Equip 3. Next is Masterwork of Ingenuity. Masterwork of Ingenuity costs 1 colorless and reads, you may have Masterwork of Ingenuity enter the battlefield as a copy of any equipment on the battlefield. The flavor reads, the crucible yields what you have forged in your mind. You need only reach in and draw the masterwork forth. Wahara, keeper of the crucible. Next is Crystal Skull Isu Spyglass. Crystal Skull costs 2 colorless and 2 blue, and reads, you may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may play historic lands and cast historic spells from the top of your library. Tap to add 1 blue. The flavor reads, the device can spy on anyone with just a drop of their blood. Next is Brotherhood Regalia. Brotherhood Regalia costs 2 colorless and reads, equipped creature has Ward 2 is an assassin in addition to its other types, and can't be blocked. Equip legendary creature 1. Equip 3. The flavor reads, an assassin's best armor is not being seen. Next is Sword of Light and Shadow. Sword of Light and Shadow costs 3 colorless and reads, equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from white and from black. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you gain 3 life and you may return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Equip 2. Next is Sword of Feast and Famine. Sword of Feast and Famine costs 3 colorless and reads, equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from black and from green. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card and you untap all lands you control. Equip 2. Last but not least, Black Blade Reforged. Black Blade Reforged costs 2 colorless and reads, equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each land you control. Equip legendary creature 3. Equip 7. The flavor reads, tempered in the blood of 10,000 sacrifices, superstitious drivel. Mishra, note to his researchers. And that has been a deck that I lovingly call I Hate You 3000. Thank you very much for being here. I'll see you next time.